CHAPTER 1 of Book 3 of Rhetoric. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Rhetoric by Aristotle. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 1 of Book 3. There are three things which it is requisite to discuss concerning an oration. One, indeed, from what particulars credibility is derived, the second about diction, and the third, in what manner it is requisite to arrange the parts of an oration. Concerning credibility, therefore, we have already spoken, and have shown from how many things it consists, and that it consists from three things. We have likewise shown what the nature is of these three, and why credibility consists from these alone. For all men are persuaded to believe what they hear, either because those who judge are themselves affected in a certain way, or because they conceive the speakers to be worthy of belief, or because the thing is proved. We have also spoken concerning enthymemes, and have shown whence they ought to be derived. For some things indeed are the species, but others the places of enthymemes. It now, however, remains to speak concerning diction. For it is not only sufficient to know what ought to be said, but it is likewise necessary to speak in a proper manner. And diction contributes greatly to the quality of the oration. The parts of rhetoric therefore were investigated by the ancients in that order in which they are naturally arranged. But from the nature of a thing, we ought in the first place to discover those things which are adapted to persuade. In the second place, these are to be disposed, i.e. expressed by an appropriate diction. And that which is to be considered in the third place, and possesses the greatest power, though it has not yet been discussed by any one, is what pertains to pronunciation or action. For this was but lately introduced into tragic poetry and rhapsody. For at first the poets themselves acted the tragedies which they composed. It is evident, therefore, that with respect to rhetoric, there is a thing of this kind, in the same manner as with respect to poetry, which has been discussed by certain other persons, and by Glauco and Tyon. Pronunciation, however, or action, consists in the voice, and the principal artifice of action consists in knowing how it is requisite to use it to each of the passions. Thus, for instance, it is necessary to know when the voice should be loud, when soft, and when between both, how the tones of voice should be employed, such as the acute, the grave, and the middle, and what rhythms are adapted to each of the passions. For there are three things which the writers on pronunciation consider, and these are magnitude, harmony, and rhythm. And as in poetical contests, those who excel in action, for the most part obtain the prize, and the players now excel in it more than the poets themselves. Thus also in forensic contests, through the depravity of politics, those orators gain their cause who excel in action. The art, however, concerning rhetorical action has not yet been disclosed, since, likewise, the art concerning diction was discovered late. And it appears to be but a slight thing, if it is well examined. But since the business concerning rhetoric pertains to opinion, we must pay attention to it, not as a thing possessing rectitude, but as necessary, since it is just not to require more in an oration than that it may neither give pain nor delight. For it is just to contend strenuously for things themselves, so that other things besides demonstration are superfluous. At the same time, however, diction is capable of producing great effects, as we have said, through the depravity of the hearer. Diction, therefore, possesses a certain small necessity in every discipline. For it is of some consequence with respect to the declaration of a thing to speak in this, or in that manner, yet it is not very important. But all these things, i.e. whatever pertains to rhetoric, depend on the imagination, and are referred to the hearer. Hence, no one teaches geometry in this way, viz. so as to be solicitous about diction. The art, therefore, concerning pronunciation, when it is employed, produces the same effect as acting on the stage. But some persons have endeavoured to speak a little concerning it, as for instance Thrasymachus in his treatise On Compassion. And to be disposed to act is natural, and more inartificial, but diction is artificial. Hence again, rewards are given to those who excel in it, in the same manner as to those rhetoricians who excel in pronunciation. For written orations possess greater strength from diction than from the sentiments they contain. The poets, therefore, gave rise to diction, as it is natural they should. For names are imitations, and of all our parts, voice is the most imitative. Hence the poets invented the poetical arts, viz. Rhapsody, or epic poetry, and the art of acting, or dramatic poetry, and the other arts. Because, however, the poets, though they sing of frivolous things, appear to have acquired their renown from diction. On this account poetic diction, such as that of Gorgias, was introduced by orators. And even now many of the unlearned fancy that those persons speak most beautifully when they speak poetically. This, however, is not the case, but the diction of an oration is different from that of poetry. And this is evident from the event. For the present writers of tragedies do not any longer employ the ancient poetic diction, but as from tetrameters they betook themselves to iambic verse, because this measure is of all others most similar to discourse. Thus also they rejected such names as are foreign from familiar conversation. Those likewise who at present compose hexameter verses have rejected the names with which the first dramatic poets adorned their verses. Hence it is ridiculous for those to imitate these poets who no longer employ that mode of diction. Hence too it is evident that we are not accurately to discuss every thing which may be said concerning diction, but only such things as pertain to rhetorical diction. For of poetical diction we have spoken in the treatise on poetry. CHAPTER 2. Let, therefore, what we have written in the Poetic be surveyed, and let the virtue of diction be perspicuity, of which this is an indication, that speech does not effect its proper work unless it renders manifest the mind of the speaker. Another virtue of diction is, that it be neither low nor above its dignity, but appropriate. For poetic diction perhaps is not low, and yet is not adapted to an oration. But of nouns and verbs, such as are proper render the diction perspicuous. Such other names, however, as are mentioned in the Poetic, cause the diction not to be low, but ornamented. For the introduction of unusual words makes the diction appear more venerable, since men are affected in the same manner towards diction, as they are towards strangers and their fellow citizens. Hence it is necessary to render the dialect foreign. For we admire the language of foreigners, and that which is admirable is pleasant. In metre, therefore, the poet does this frequently, and there it is appropriate. For both the verse and the subjects of the verse are very remote from common occurrences. But in prose, much fewer foreign words are to be used. For there, if either a slave, or a very young man, or one who speaks of very trifling things, uses elegant language, it is more indecorous. But in the language of these persons, the becoming consists in an appropriate contraction and dilation. Unusual words, however, should be introduced by the orator latently, and he should not seem to speak fictitiously, but naturally. For natural diction is adapted to persuade, but the fictitious has a contrary effect. For we avoid those who speak fictitiously as insidious persons, in the same manner as we avoid mixed wines. Thus the voice of Theodorus was preferred to the voice of other actors, for his seemed to be the voice of the speaker, but the voice of the others appeared to be foreign. Unusual terms, however, will be well introduced latently, if he who frames a speech makes a selection from the accustomed dialect, which Euripides does, and was the first that showed the way to others. But since an oration consists from nouns and verbs, and nouns have as many species as are enumerated in the treatise on poetry, of these species, nouns taken from various tongues or dialects, and also such as are double and fictitious, are seldom, and but in few places to be used. Where however they are to be used, and why but seldom, we shall afterwards show. For they produce a greater change in the language than is becoming. But the proper, the appropriate, and metaphorical, are alone useful to prosaic diction, of which this is an indication, that all men in common conversation use these alone. For all men speak in metaphors, and in appropriate and proper terms. Hence it is evident, that if any one does this well, his diction will be foreign, and it may be latent that it is so, and he will speak with perspicuity. But this was defined by us to be the virtue of a rhetorical discourse. Of names or nouns, however, the homonymous are useful to the sophist. For through these they deceive, but the synonymous are useful to the poet. I call, however, proper and synonymous terms such as to go and to walk, for both these are proper and synonymous to each other. What therefore each of these is, how many species there are of metaphor, and that metaphors can do much both in poetry and prose, we have shown, as we have before observed, in the treatise on poetry. But it is so much more necessary to labour about these in prose, because it has fewer aids than verse. A metaphor also especially possesses the clear, the pleasant, and the foreign, and it is not to be taken from another person. It is necessary, however, to use epithets and metaphors that are appropriate, and this adaptation will be obtained from the analogous. But without this there will be an apparent indecorum, because contraries are especially conspicuous when placed by each other. As a purple garment, therefore, becomes a young man, but not an old man, for the same garment is not adapted to both. Thus also certain metaphors and epithets are adapted to some things, but are not adapted to others. If likewise you are willing to praise, the metaphor must be derived from that which is better in the same genus. But if to blame, it must be derived from things which in the same genus are inferior. I say for instance, since contraries are in the same genus, to say, that a beggar prays, and that he who prays begs, because both are petitions, it is expedient to do as we have said. Thus Iphicrates called Callias Metrigertes, or collector to the mother of the gods, and not Daducos, or torchbearer. But Callias replied, that Iphicrates was not initiated, otherwise he would not have called him Metrigertes, but Daducos. For both these offices pertain to the goddess. But that of torchbearer was honourable, and that of collector ignoble. The flatterers of Dionysius also employed the same artifice, for they called themselves artists. Both these words, however, are metaphors, the one indeed of things sordid, but the other the contrary. And robbers at present call themselves exactors. Hence we may be allowed to say, that he who acts unjustly errs, and that he who errs acts unjustly, and also that he who steals both takes and robs." There is, however, an indecorum in what Telephus in Euripides says of certain rowers, that they reigned over oars and descended into Mysia." For the word to reign is greater than the dignity of the matter, i.e. of an oar. He does not therefore conceal his artifice. There is also an error in syllables, unless they cause the words to have a pleasing sound. And this error was committed by Dionysius, surnamed Chalcus, in his Elegies. For he calls poetry, the clangour of Calliope, because both are vocal sounds. But the metaphor is bad, which is made from sounds that are not significant. Farther still, nouns are not to be far-fetched, but things which are anonymous are to be denominated by words derived from things that are allied, and of the same species, and which show as soon as they are uttered that they are allied, as in the celebrated enigma, I saw a man agglutinating brass to a man with fire, for the passion is anonymous, but both are a certain addition. The enigma, therefore, calls the application of the cupping glass an agglutination. And in short, from enigmas that are well composed, good metaphors may be assumed. For metaphors have an obscure meaning, so that it is evident that an enigma, if it is approved, consists of metaphors that are well made. Metaphors also must be assumed from beautiful things. But the beauty of a name consists, as Lysimnius says, in sounds, or in the thing signified, and in a similar manner the deformity of a name. Farther still, there is a third thing, which solves a sophistical argument. For that which Bryson says is not true, that no one speaks obscurely, since the same thing is signified by using this name instead of that. For this is false, since one name is more proper and more assimilated than another, and is more adapted to place the thing before our eyes. Again, this name and that signify a thing not similarly subsisting, so that thus also one name must be admitted to be more beautiful or more deformed than another. For both names, indeed, signify the beautiful and the deformed, but not so far as beautiful, or so far as deformed. Or both signifying the same thing, but in a greater or less degree. Metaphors, however, are hence to be derived from things which are beautiful, either in the voice, or in the power of signification, or to the sight, or some other sense. But it makes a difference to say, for instance, the rosy-fingered morn, rather than, the purple-fingered, or, which is still worse, the red-fingered. In epithets also, appositions may be made from what is vile or base, as for instance the matricide. But the apposition may be made from that which is better, as the avenger of his father. And Simonides, when he who conquered with mules offered him a small reward, was unwilling to compose verses on the occasion, as disdaining to celebrate in verse semi-asses. But when he had given him a sufficient reward, then he sung, Hail daughters of the steeds that fly, with feet like whirlwind swift, though they were also the daughters of asses. Farther still, a thing may be praised or blamed by employing diminutives. But diminution is that which renders both evil and good less. Thus Aristophanes in his Babylonics calls in derision crucian (a golden thing), crucidarian, and imation (a garment), imatidarian. He also calls loidoria (slander), loidorimation, and nosema (disease), nosemation. In both appositions, however, and diminutives, it is requisite to be cautious, and to observe a mediocrity. CHAPTER 3. Frigidity may be produced in diction in 4 ways. In the first place, in double nouns, i.e. in compound words. As in Lycophron, when he says, the many-faced heaven, the mighty-topped earth, and the narrow-mouthed shore. And as Gorgias calls some one a beggarly-mused flatterer, and those who take an oath improperly or properly epiorchasantes, and catorchasantes. And as Alcidamas, when describing some one who was in a rage, his soul was full of ardour, but his face was of a fiery colour. And speaking of the promptitude of a certain person to fight to the last, he calls him telesphorus, or enduring to the end. He likewise calls the power of persuading telesphoros, and the bottom of the sea quanachrun, or azure coloured. For all these expressions appear to be poetical from duplication. This therefore is one cause of frigid diction. Another cause arises from the use of ancient words. Thus Lycophron calls Xerxes Pelorion Andra, or an immense man, and Siron he calls Sinus Anear, or a pernicious man. Alcidamas also, speaking of poetry, says no such atherma or puerile sport is useful to poetry. And speaking of nature, he uses the expression adasthalia or improbity. And of a certain person he says, that he was exasperated with the untamed anger of his mind. In the third place, diction may become frigid from using epithets which are either long, or unreasonable, or frequent. For in poetry it is becoming to say white milk. But in prose, epithets are partly more unbecoming, and partly, if they are too frequent, they cause prose to appear to be verse. Epithets, however, are sometimes to be used in prose, for they render the diction more unusual, and cause it to be foreign. But mediocrity must be regarded in the use of them, since otherwise a greater evil is produced than by speaking casually. For casual diction is not good, but the other is bad. Hence the writings of Alcidamas appear to be frigid, for he uses epithets, not as seasonings, but as food, since they are so frequent in his writings, so great, and so apparent. Thus for instance, he does not merely say sweat, but moist sweat. And he does not say that someone went to the Isthmia, or solemn games in honour of Neptune, but to the general assembly of the Isthmian games. Thus too he does not say the laws, but legal institutes, the queen of cities. Nor does he say in running, but with the rapid impulse of the soul. Nor museum, but receiving the museum of nature, and the sad care of the soul, instead of merely saying care. Nor does he say favour, but the artificer of popular favour. And again he calls an orator the dispensator of the pleasure of his hearers. And he did not hide himself in the branches, but in the branches of the wood. And he did not cover his body, but the shame of his body, and desire the anti-rival of the soul. But this is at the same time a double word, and an epithet, so that it becomes poetical. Thus too, speaking of improbity, he says, the immense excess of improbity. Hence, those who speak poetically produce the ridiculous and the frigid, by their indecorous diction, and also occasion obscurity by their garrulity. For garrulity dissolves perspicuity, when it is introduced to him who knows the subject, by the obscurity which it occasions. Men however use double or compound words, when a thing is anonymous, and the words may be easily joined, such as time wasting. But if this is done frequently, the diction becomes entirely poetical. Hence a double diction, i.e. compound words, are most useful to dithyrambic poets, for the language of these is sonorous. But ancient names and dialects are more adapted to epic poets. For epic poetry is venerable and superb, and metaphors are most adapted to iambics. For these, as we have before observed, iambic poets now use. Again, in the fourth place, frigidity is produced in metaphors. For there are indecorous metaphors, some indeed on account of the ridiculous, for comic poets also use metaphors, but others are indecorous from being too venerable and tragical. Metaphors likewise are obscure if they are far-fetched, as those of Gorgias, who calls certain things green and sanguineous. And you indeed have shamefully sown, and badly reaped these things. For this is too poetically said. Thus too Alcidamas calls philosophy the bulwark of the laws, and the Odyssey a beautiful mirror of human life. And again he says, Nothing of this kind introduces puerile sport in poetry. For all these metaphors from the causes already mentioned are unadapted to procure persuasion. But what Gorgias said on a swallow which dropped its excrement as it flew towards him, is the best of tragical metaphors. For he said, This is shameful, O Philomel. For if he said this to the bird, the action was not shameful, but to a virgin it was shameful. His defamation therefore was proper, because he alluded to what the bird had been, and not to what it then was. CHAPTER 4. An image also is a metaphor, for it differs very little from it. For when Homer says of Achilles, He like a lion rushed, it is an image. But when he says, the lion rushed, it is a metaphor. For because both are brave, he calls Achilles metaphorically a lion. An image also is useful in prose, though but rarely, for it is poetical. Images, however, are to be introduced in the same manner as metaphors, for they are metaphors, differing in the way we have already mentioned. But images are for instance such as what Androtion said on Idrieus, that he resembled whelps freed from their chains, for they bite any one that falls in their way, and Idrieus when freed from his bonds was morose. And as Theodamas assimilated Archidamus to Euxenus, who was ignorant of geometry, and this from the analogous. For Euxenus is the geometrical Archidamus. Another instance of similitude is from the 5th book of the Republic of Plato, that those who in battle plunder the bodies of the dead are similar to whelps who bite stones, but do not touch those who throw them. And in the 6th book it is said of the people, that they resemble a strong, but deaf pilot. And in the 10th book, speaking of poetical measures, it is said, that they resemble those who are in the prime of life, but without beauty. For these in the decline of life, and verses when they are dissolved, no longer appear the same. Another instance is that of Pericles on the Samians, that they resembled children who take their food crying. And on the Boeotians, that they resembled flints, for flints are struck against each other, and the Boeotians fight with each other. Another instance is that of Demosthenes on the Athenian people, that they resembled those who are seasick, and that of Democritus, who assimilated rhetoricians to nurses, who swallow the food themselves, and anoint the children with the spittle. And again that of Antisthenes, who assimilated Cephisytidas, who was a thin man, to frankincense, which delights while it consumes. For all these similitudes may be used both as images and as metaphors, so that it is evident that such words as are approved and are used as metaphors will also be images, and likewise that images are metaphors which are in want of argument. It is always, however, necessary that a metaphor should be converted from the analogous, and be referred to the other part, and to things homogeneous. Thus if a cup may from analogy be called the shield of Bacchus, a shield also may appropriately be said to be the cup of Mars. From these things, therefore, an oration is composed. CHAPTER 5. The principle, however, of diction is to speak with propriety, and this consists in 5 things. And the first indeed is in conjunctives, if these are disposed in such a way as their nature requires, viz. So as to be placed in an order prior and posterior to each other. Thus for instance the conjunction indeed, and I indeed, require but, and but he. It must be remembered, however, that conjunctions which correspond to each other should neither be disjoined by a great interval, nor should have so many things interposed between them, that when a conjunction corresponding to a former one is given, the prior conjunction is forgotten. For this is appropriate but in few places. Thus, but I, after the thing was related to me, for Cleon came begging and entreating, went taking them along with me. For here many conjunctions are inserted prior to the conjunction which was to have been assigned. But if there is a great interval between but I and I went, the sentence becomes obscure. One thing, therefore, requisite to correct diction is a proper disposition in the conjunctions. A second is, to call things by their proper names, and not to circumscribe them by generic and common names. A third is, not to use ambiguous words. But these precepts are to be observed, unless the contraries to them are preferred, which those do, who when they have nothing to say, pretend to say something. For men of this kind in poetry thus speak, as for instance Empedocles. For circumlocution deceives, if it be much, and the auditors are affected in the same manner as the multitude are by those who predict future events, since when they speak ambiguously, the vulgar assent to what they say. If Croesus passes over the river Halys, he will destroy a mighty empire. But the reason why, when we have nothing to say, we should use generic terms is, because in short, the error will be less. And on this account, diviners speak through the genera of a thing. For in the game of even and odd, he will be less likely to err who says that a number is even or odd in general, than if he determines what number is so. And he who predicts that a certain event will be, is less likely to err if he only says that it will be, than if he assigns the time when it will be. Hence, those who deliver oracles do not define the time when a thing will happen. All these generic and ambiguous names, therefore, are to be avoided, unless they are adopted for the sake of some such purpose as we have mentioned. A fourth thing requisite to correct diction is, as Protagoras divided the genera of nouns into masculine, feminine, and instruments, or neuter, to employ these rightly, as, she coming and discoursing departed. A fifth requisite is to denominate rightly in many and few things, and in one thing, as, but they coming struck me. In short, it is requisite that what is written should be so written as to be read and pronounced with facility. But this is not the case when there are many conjunctions, and when what is written cannot be easily pointed. And such are the writings of Heraclitus. For it is laborious to point the writings of Heraclitus, because it is immanifest what should be conjoined with the prior or posterior part, as in the beginning of his book. For he there says, Of reason existing always men are ignorant, since it is immanifest whether the word always pertains to the prior or to the posterior part. Farther still, a solecism is produced in composition when to two words another appropriate word is not conjoined. Thus to noise and colour, seeing is not a common, i.e. is not an appropriate word, but sensible perception is common. The composition also is rendered obscure from the insertion of much which is intermediate, unless the part which corresponds to the first part of a sentence is immediately subjoined, and the rest added, as, my intention was, after I had mentioned such and such things to him, to go. But this obscurity would be avoided by saying, my intention was, after I had spoken to him, to go, and then to add, having mentioned to him such and such things. CHAPTER 6. The following particulars contribute to the amplitude of diction. To use definition or description instead of a name, as instead of saying a circle to say, a plane figure in which all lines drawn from the middle to the circumference are equal. But the contrary contributes to conciseness, viz. To the use of the name instead of the definition. Amplitude of diction is also affected, if when anything disgraceful or indecorous is to be expressed, the name is used when the disgraceful thing is in the definition, but the definition if it is in the name. it is likewise effected by rendering a thing manifest by metaphors and epithets, avoiding at the same time what is poetical, and by causing one thing to be many, i.e. by using the plural instead of the singular number, which the poets do. For when there is but one part, they nevertheless say, " Into the Achaean parts," and instead of saying, "The complication of an epistle," they say, "The complications of epistles." Amplitude is also effected by separating what we can conjoin ; as, "This woman, this our wife." But if we wish to speak concisely, we must say on the contrary, "This woman our wife." And it is effected by using a conjunction. But if we wish to speak concisely, we must not employ a conjunction, yet the sentence must not be unconnected, as in the first case, "Going and speaking to him," and in the second, "Going, I spoke to him." The method of Antimachus likewise is useful for this purpose, viz. to enumerate particulars which a thing does not possess, which he does, speaking of the hill Teumessus ; for he says, "A little hill there is, exposed to wind." For thus we may amplify to infinity. And this may take place both in what is good and what is bad, by enumerating what is not inherent, in whatever way it may be useful to the oration. Hence, also, poets derive the words chordless and lyreless melody, for these words are derived from privations. But what we have just said is adopted in metaphors taken from the analogous, such for instance as to say, "That the sound of a trumpet is a lyreless melody." CHAPTER 7. Diction, also, will possess what is decorous, if it is pathetic and ethical, and analogous to the subject matter. But the analogous is effected by neither speaking of things grand and magnificent slightly, nor of abject things venerably and magnificently, nor giving ornament to a vile appellation. For if this is not adopted, the composition will appear to be a comedy, which is the case with that of Cleon. For some things which he writes are just as if a man should say, "A venerable fig." Diction becomes pathetic by reciting insolent behaviour in the language of an angry person. But when conduct has been impious and shameful, then the diction becomes pathetic, by speaking indignantly and cautiously. And when conduct has been laudable, this is effected by speaking with admiration. But in things of a lamentable nature, the pathetic is produced by a humble diction. And the like method must be adopted in other things. Appropriate diction, also, persuades to the truth of a thing. For the soul of the auditor is deceived by false reasoning, in consequence of conceiving that the orator speaks the truth, because the auditors are thus affected in such like orations. Hence they fancy that things are as the orator says, though they are not so. The auditor, likewise, becomes similarly affected with him who speaks pathetically, though he should say nothing to the purpose. Hence many astonish the hearers by the tumultuous manner in which they deliver their orations. Moreover, ethical diction is a demonstration from signs, because this when appropriate is consequent to every genus and habit. But I mean by genus, indeed, age, such as a child, or a man, or an old man; sex, as man or woman; and nation, as a Lacedaemonian or a Thessalian. And by habits I mean those things which produce the variety of conditions in life. For the lives of men are not such as they are according to every habit. If, therefore, the diction has appellations adapted to the habit, it will become ethical. For a rustic and a well^educated man will not say the same things, nor speak after the same manner. But the auditors are somewhat affected by that figure which the writers of orations abundantly use, as, Who does not know this? All men know it." For the auditor from shame confesses that he participates of that knowledge of which every one else partakes. Opportune, however, or not opportune use is common to all the species. But the remedy in every hyperbole is that celebrated advice, self*correction. For it is necessary that the orator should correct himself; for the thing then appears to be true, though it may seem to be incredible, because the incredibility of it is not concealed from the orator. Farther still, every thing analogous is not to be used at once ; for thus the artifice will be concealed from the hearer. I mean, for instance, that if the names are harsh, yet must not the voice, or countenance, or other appropriate things, be such as to express that harshness ; otherwise it will become manifest what each of these is. But if the names are harsh, and the voice or countenance is not adapted to such names, the artifice will be latent. If, therefore, soft things be spoken harshly, and harsh things gently, they will lose the power of persuading. But epithets and compound words, if they are numerous, and especially such as are foreign, are adapted to him who speaks pathetically. For we pardon the orator, who when enraged calls some evil heaven*reaching, or immense. These epithets also, and compound words, may be used by the orator, when he has already moved the auditors, and inspired them with a divine fury, either by praising or dispraising, or by exciting them to anger or love ; which Isocrates does in his panegyric towards the end, where he has the words, Fame and memory," and those who endured." For those who are agitated with a divine fury speak things of this kind, so that auditors admit what is said, in consequence of being similarly affected. Hence, this form of diction is also adapted to poetry ; for poetry partakes of divine inspiration. Either, therefore, this form of diction must be adopted, in the cases already mentioned, or irony must be employed, as it was by Gorgias and Socrates in the Phaedrus of Plato. CHAPTER 8. With respect, however, to the figure of diction, it is necessary that it should neither be metrical, nor without rhythm. For metrical diction is not calculated to persuade ; for it appears to be feigned, and calls the attention of the auditor from the subject of the oration, since he is led to expect a metre similar to the former. As, therefore, when the criers proclaim to the people when a slave is manumitted by his master, What patron will he who is manumitted choose ? The boys antecedently to the crier exclaim, Cleon. Thus, if the oration were metrical, the auditors would preoccupy the orator, and would foresee what he ought to say. But the diction which is without rhythm is indefinite. It is necessary, however, that it should be bounded, though not by metre. For the infinite is unpleasant and unknown, and all things are bounded by number. But the number of the figure of diction is rhythm, of which metres are the segments. Hence, it is necessary that an oration should have rhythm, but not metre or measure ; for if it has, it will be a poem. It should not, however, possess rhythm accurately, but only to a certain extent. Of rhythms, however, the heroic indeed is venerable and sonorous, and requires harmony ; but the iambic is the diction of the multitude. Hence, in speaking, iambics are uttered the most of all measures ; but it is necessary that the prose of an oration should be venerable, and very exciting. The trochaic measure, however, is more analogous to swift dancing ; but this is evident from tetrameters, which are a voluble rhythm. The paean therefore remains, which was employed by orators, and originated from Thrasymachus. Yet they were unable to say what it was. But the paean is the third in order, and follows the above mentioned measures ; for it is in the ratio of 3 to 2. but of the others the one, i.e. the heroic, is in the ratio of 1 to 1, but the other, i.e. the iambic and the trochaic, in the ratio of 2 to 1. The sesquialter, however, is consequent to these two ratios, and the paean consists of this ratio. The other rhythms, therefore, are to be rejected from the above mentioned reasons, and because they are metrical, but the paean is to be assumed, for from this alone of all the rhythms we have mentioned, metre is not produced, so that it is especially latent. At present, therefore, orators use only one paean, and that at the beginning of their oration. It is necessary, however, that the end should differ from the beginning. But there are two species of paeans opposite to each other, of which one is adapted to the beginning of an oration, in which way also it is used by orators, but this is that paean in which the first syllable is long, and the other three are short, as Delos begotten, or Lycian, speaking of Apollo, and O golden-haired Hecate, daughter of Jove. But in the other paean, on the contrary, the first three syllables are short, and the last is long, as Night concealed after the land, the water, and the ocean. This paean, however, terminates the course of the oration. For a short syllable, because it is imperfect, causes the oration to be mutilated. But it is necessary that it should be amputated by a long syllable, and that the end of it should be manifest, yet not from the writer, nor from a paragraph, but from the rhythm. And thus we have shown that diction ought to have a proper rhythm, and should not be without rhythm, and also what the rhythms are, and how those subsist, that produce a proper rhythm in diction. CHAPTER 9. It is necessary, however, that diction should either be diffuse, and won by a bond, as the dilatations in dithyrambics, or that it should be periodic, and similar to the antistrophes of the ancient poets. Diffuse diction, therefore, is ancient, as in the work of Herodotus the Thurian, the beginning of which is, This is the exposition of history, &c. For this formerly all writers used, but at present it is not used by many. But I call the diction diffuse, which has of itself no end, till the thing which is discussed be brought to a conclusion. This diction is, however, unpleasant, on account of the infinite, for all men wish to see the end of a thing. Hence racers in the turnings round the goal are out of breath, and faint. But prior to this, when they have a prospect of the goal, their labour is not so extreme. Such, therefore, is diffuse diction. But periodic diction is that which consists of periods. I call, however, a period diction which has of itself a beginning and end, and a magnitude which may easily be perceived. But diction of this kind is pleasing, and easily learnt. It is pleasing, indeed, because it subsists in a way contrary to that which is boundless, and because the hearer always fancies he obtains something, because there is always something for him which is bounded. But it is unpleasant where nothing is foreseen, and nothing effected. It is also easily learnt, because it may easily be remembered. But it may easily be remembered, because this diction has number in the periods. Hence all men remember verse more easily than prose, for it has number by which it is measured. It is necessary, however, that a period should contain a complete, and not a mutilated and abrupt meaning, as in the iambics of Sophocles, Calydon, the land where Pelops reigned. For the contrary might be thought to be true by a division of the period, as in the above instance it would seem that Calydon is in the Peloponnesus. With respect to periods, however, one is in the colons, or members, but the other is simple. But the period which is in the colons is a perfect and distinct diction, and in which what is pronounced admits of easy respiration, and does not consist in a division, like the above mentioned period of Sophocles, but is a whole and entire. But I call the period simple, which consists of one colon. It is necessary, however, that the colons and the periods should neither be curtailed nor prolix. For when the periods are very short, they cause the hearer to stumble frequently. For the mind of the hearer, being impelled farther to the end which he had proposed to himself, stumbles as it were, when the orator stops short. But prolix periods cause the auditors to be left by the orator, just as those who in walking pass beyond the boundaries of their walk, for they leave their companions behind. In a similar manner, periods which are long become themselves an oration, and resemble diffuse diction. Whence that jest of Democritus the Chian upon Melanippides, who dilated in his writings instead of making antistrophes. This man frames evil for himself, in framing evil for another, but to dilate much is the worst of evils to him who does it. For a thing of this kind may be aptly said to those who use long colons. Very short colons, however, do not become periods. These, therefore, hurry away the auditor with them precipitately. But of periodic diction, which consists of many colons or members, one kind is distinct, and the other opposite. And the distinct, indeed, is such as the beginning of the panegyric of Isocrates. I have often admired those who collected public assemblies and instituted the gymnastic contests. But the opposite is that which consists of many colons, and in which either the same thing is composed with contraries, or contraries are composed with contraries, as in the panegyric of Isocrates. The Athenians benefited both those that remained at home and those that followed, for they acquired more for those that followed them, than they possessed at home, and they left sufficient for the support of those that stayed behind. Here the contraries are staying and following, sufficient and more. And again, in the same oration, so that to those who were in want of money, and to those who were willing to enjoy it, &c. Here enjoyment is opposed to acquisition. Farther still, it frequently happens in these things that prudent men are unfortunate, and the imprudent are prosperous. And immediately, indeed, they obtained the rewards of brave men, and not long after they became masters of the sea. Another example is, he sailed indeed through the continent, but walked through the sea. He joined the Hellespont, but dug through Mount Athos. And being citizens by nature, but by law deprived of a city, for some of them indeed perished miserably, but others were shamefully preserved. And privately indeed they used barbarian servants, but publicly overlooked many of their allies that were in slavery. And to have them when living, or leave them when dead. Or what a certain person said against Pitholaus and Lycophron in a court of justice, They sold you indeed when they were at home, but when they came to us they were themselves bought. For all these instances make the above mentioned periodic opposite diction. Diction, however, of this kind is pleasing, because contraries are most known, and when placed by each other are more known, and also because they resemble a syllogism. For an elenchus, or syllogism of contradiction, is a collection of opposites. A thing therefore of this kind is antithesis. But adequation takes place when the colons or members are equal, as the father died in battle, the son was married at home. And assimilation is when both the colons have similar extremes, but it is necessary that they should have similar extremes, either in the beginning or the end, And the beginning indeed has always similar nouns, but the end has the last syllables similar, or cases of the same noun, or the same noun. In the beginning, indeed, the similar extremes are such as in the following instances, He received land from him, but it was uncultivated land, and appeased with gifts, and mollified with words. But the similar extremes in the end are, They did not think that he had brought forth a boy, but that he was the cause of his birth. In great cares, and in little hopes. Cases of the same noun are such as, But he deserves to have a brazen statue, though he is not worthy of brass, i.e. of a brazen coin. And an instance of the repetition of the same noun is, You while he was living defamed him, and now he is dead, right ill of him. But an instance when there is a similitude alone in the last syllable is, What evil have you suffered, if you have seen an indolent man? A period also may have all these at once, so as not only to consist of opposite, but also of equal, and similarly ending colons. The beginnings, however, of periods are nearly all of them enumerated in our Theodectean Rhetoric. There are likewise false oppositions, such as Epicharmus made, Then I was one of them, then I was with them. CHAPTER 10. These things, therefore, being discussed, let us now show whence polite and the most approved diction is derived. To speak politely, therefore, is the province of an ingenious man, or of one who is exercised in elocution. But to show the sources from whence polite diction is derived belongs to this method, i.e. to rhetoric. We shall therefore unfold and enumerate what they are. Let the beginning, therefore, be this. To learn easily is naturally delightful to all men, but names signify something. Hence, such names as cause us to learn are most pleasing. Foreign tongues, therefore, are unknown, but proper words we know. Metaphor, however, especially causes diction to be polite. For when the poet says that Old age is stubble, he produces in us learning and knowledge through the genus, i.e. through the agreement of old age and stubble, since both produce a defloration. The image, therefore, of poets produce indeed the same thing, and hence if they are well employed, the diction will appear to be polite. For an image, as we have before observed, is a metaphor, differing from it in the collocation, on which account it is less pleasing because it is a longer simile, and it does not say this thing is that. Hence, in a metaphor, the mind does not investigate the similitude, i.e. its attention is not diverted from the object to which it is directed. That diction, therefore, and those enthymemes must necessarily be polite, which cause us to learn or produce in us knowledge rapidly. Hence, neither are superficial enthymemes approved, (for we call those enthymemes superficial, which are manifest to every one, and which require no investigation), nor such as when produced are not understood, but those only render the diction polite which are understood as soon as they are uttered, though there was no previous knowledge of them, or which shortly after lead us to the knowledge of something of which we were ignorant. For by the latter enthymemes discipline is, as it were, produced, but by no means by the former. Enthymemes, therefore, of this kind are approved from the sense of meaning of the diction. Urbanity, however, is produced in the figure or form of the diction, if contraries are opposed to contraries, as in the oration of Isocrates de Pace, And they thought that the peace, which is common to the other Greeks, was war to their own private affairs. For here war is opposed to peace. Urbanity also is produced in names or words, if they are metaphorical, and the metaphor is neither foreign, for this is difficult to understand, nor superficial, for this does not affect the hearer. Farther still, urbanity in diction is produced if the thing itself is placed before the eyes ; for it is more necessary to see what has been, than what will be done. It is requisite, therefore, to pay attention to these three things, viz. Metaphor, antithesis, and energy. As, however, there are four kinds of metaphors, those are most approved which subsist according to analogy ; as when Pericles said, That youth perishing in battle was taken away from the city, just as if some one should take away the spring from the year. And as Leptines said of the Lacedaemonians, That the Athenians should not suffer Greece to be deprived of its other eye. Thus too Cephisodotus, when Chares was anxious to give an account of the Olynthiac war, said indignantly, That while he endeavoured to give the people an account of his conduct, he kept them in a furnace. And the same person, once exhorting the Athenians to forage in Euboea, said, It was necessary that the decree of Miltiades should proceed to the Euboeic expedition. And Iphicrates, when the Athenians had made a league with Epidaurus and the sea coast, said indignantly, That they had deprived themselves of the viatica of war. And Pitholus called the Athenian ship, which was denominated Perillus, the club (Robalon) of the people. He also called Cestus the granary of the Piraeum. Pericles likewise exhorted the Athenians to destroy Aegina, as the ophthalmi of the Piraeum. And Mericles, naming a certain worthy person, said, That he was in no respect more depraved than this person ; for with respect to him he had taken 3 per cent interest, but that he himself had taken 10 per cent. And the iambic of Anaxandrides upon his daughters that were a long time before they married, The virgins have passed beyond the appointed day of wedlock. To these may be added what Polyeuctus said on one Speusippus, who was a restless man and apoplectic, That he could not be quiet, though he was bound by fortune in the Pentasurigian disease. Cephisodotus likewise called 3-banked galleys various baking houses. But the dog, i.e. Diogenes, called taverns the Attic Vidicia. And Aetion said, That the Athenians had poured forth their city into Sicily. For this is a metaphor, and places the thing before the eyes. Aetion adds, That the Athenians had so poured forth their city into Sicily, that Greece vociferated. For this also is after a manner a metaphor, and places the thing before the eyes. Cephisodotus also exhorted the Athenians to beware, That they did not make their assemblies hostile congresses. And Isocrates said, That the sophists addressed themselves to those who run together in the public assemblies. And as in the funeral oration of Lysias, It was but just that Greece should cut off her hair on the tomb of those who died at Salamis, because her liberty was buried with their virtue. For if he had said, That it was but just Greece should weep in consequence of virtue being buried with those who died at Salamis, it would have been only a metaphor, and the thing would have been placed before the eyes. But the words, Liberty was buried with virtue, have a certain antithesis. And as Iphicrates said, The path of my oration is through the midst of the transactions of Chares. For this is a metaphor according to analogy, and the words, Through the midst, place the thing before our eyes. And to say, To call on dangers to give assistance to dangers, is to place the thing before the eyes, and is a metaphor. Another instance is that of Lycolian in defence of Chabrias, Neither will you revere his suppliant brazen statue. For this is a metaphor in the present time, but not always, and places the thing before the eyes. For he being in danger, the statue supplicates for him, and supplication is attributed to an inanimate statue, which is the property of an animated thing, and a monument of the works of the city, and they meditated by every possible way to have grovelling conceptions. For to meditate is to increase something. And again, that God enkindled the light of intellect in the soul. For both light and intellect accord in illuminating, and for we do not dissolve war, but defer it. For both deferring and a peace of this kind signify something future. And to say, that the compacts of peace are a trophy much more beautiful than those which are procured in war, for the latter are obtained for things of small consequence, and through one fortune, but the former for every battle. For both a trophy and a compact are indications of victory, and that cities through the censure of men suffer great punishment, for punishment is a certain just injury. And thus we have shown how polite diction may be derived from metaphor according to the analogous, and from placing a thing before the eyes. End of chapter 10 of book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 11 of book 3 of Rhetoric. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Rhetoric by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 11 of book 3. Let us now show what we mean by placing a thing before the eyes, and what is to be done in order to effect this. I say then, that those words place a thing before the eyes which signify things energizing. Thus for instance to say, that a good man is a square, is metaphorical. For both a good man and a square are perfect, but it does not signify energy. But to say, possessing a flourishing acme, signifies energy. Likewise to say, but you as liberated, indicates energy. And, then with impetuous feet forth rushed the Greeks. Here the word impetuous is energy, and a metaphor. Thus too energy is everywhere exhibited by Homer, who speaks of inanimate things as animated, through a metaphor. But to produce energy in everything as he does is very much applauded, as in the following instances. Back on the ground then rolled the shameless stone, and the arrow flew, and longing to strike, and Trojan and Grecian darts in earth then stood, and longed to gorge themselves with human blood, and the furious pointed dart then pierced his breast. For in all these instances, because the things are animated, they appear to energize. For to be shameless and furious, etc. are energies. But Homer has added these through metaphor from analogy. For as the stone is to Sisyphus, so is an impudent person to him who he impudently torments. Homer likewise in his celebrated images attributes to inanimate things the proper energies of such as are animated, as the afflicted deeps tumultuous mix and roar, the waves behind impel the waves before, wide rolling, foaming high, and tumbling to the shore. For he makes everything moving and living. But energy is imitation. Metaphors, however, ought to be derived as we have before observed, from things familiar and not obvious, just as in philosophy it is the province of a sagacious man to survey the similar in things very different from each other, as Archytas says, That an arbiter and an altar are the same thing, for he who is injured flies to both these. Or if some one should say, That an anchor and a cremaestra are the same thing, for both perform an office which is in a certain respect the same, but they differ in this, that the one is fixed above, and the other beneath. To say also that cities are anomalous is another instance of an appropriate metaphor taken from things very dissimilar. For as a superficies is said to be anomalous because one part rises above another, so a city may be said to be anomalous when some of the citizens in it surpass others in power. Polite diction, however, is for the most part effected through metaphor and previous deception. For the diction which not only causes us to learn something of which we were before ignorant, but also something about which we had been before deceived, is more polite and pleasant, since the mind passing from error to truth is delighted, and says to itself, How true is this which I have learnt, I was in an error. Of apothegms likewise, those are polite which imply something different from what the words at first seem to signify, as that apothegm of Stesichorus, that the grasshoppers would sing to them on the ground. Good enigmas also are for the same reason pleasing, for they cause us to learn something, and are metaphorical, and as Theodorus says, It is pleasing to say something new. But this is effected when what is said is paradoxical, and (as he says) is not conformable to prior opinion, but as in ridiculous assertions is slightly transformed. This likewise is capable of being effected by jests, in which the letters of the words are somewhat changed, for these pleasantly deceive the hearer. And also in verse, for something is said different from what the hearer expected. He walked along with chilblains on his feet, but the hearer expected it would have been said that he had sandals on his feet. This kind of jest, however, ought to be immediately manifest. Paragrams, or jests formed by the mutation of letters are produced, when that is not signified which the words at first seem to signify, as the jest of Theodorus upon Nicon the harper. For Nicon having been vexed by a certain person, Theodorus deriding him said, Thrati in, which appears as if he had said, He disturbs you, Thratiinen, and deceives the hearer. For in reality he said, He makes you a Thracian. Hence this is pleasing to him who learns the true meaning of what is said. For unless the hearer apprehends that Nicon was a Thracian, the jest would not appear to be polite. Thus also to say baulei auton Persai seems at the first view to signify, Are you willing to vex him? But the true meaning is, Are you willing to make him a favourer of the Persians, and a betrayer of the Greeks? It is requisite, however, that each sense of the ambiguous word should be adapted to him of whom it is said. Another example is such as the following, The arche of the sea was not to the Athenians the arche of evils, for they derived advantage from it. And as Isocrates says, The arche of the sea was to the city, i.e. to the Athenians, the arche of evils. For in both these instances the real meaning is different from what at the first view it appears to be, and the hearer knows that what is asserted is true. For to say that arche was arche is to say nothing to the purpose, But this is not what is said in the above instances, nor is that denied which is asserted, but the word has another meaning. In all these instances, however, if the word is appropriately employed, whether it be a homonymous word or a metaphor, then the diction is proper, as if the name of some one were Anaxidas, and it should be said that Anaxidas is not Anaxidas, i.e. importunate. For he who says this denies the homonymous signification of the word. And this is appropriately effected if the word is always used twice. Again, O hosps, i.e. guest, you will not become more hosps than is requisite. And it is not necessary that hopes should always be hopes. For this also is foreign. The same thing also is effected in the celebrated saying of Anaxandrides, It is a beautiful thing to die prior to having done any thing deserving of death. For this is the same thing as to say, It is worth while to die when not deserving to die. Or, It is worth while to die when not deserving of death, or not doing things worthy of death. The form of diction, therefore, is the same in these instances, but in proportion as they are shorter and contain a greater opposition, in such proportion they are more elegant and pleasing. The cause, however, of this is, that we in a greater degree learn something from opposition, and that this is more rapidly effected by brevity. But it is always necessary that the person should be present on whom the thing is said, or that it should be rightly said, if the assertion is true, and not superficial, for these two things may exist separately. Thus for instance, to say, It is necessary to die free from all faults, and It is requisite that a worthy man should marry a worthy woman, is true, but is not politely said. But to say, It is worth while to die when not deserving to die, is both true and politely said. The diction, also, will appear to be more polite, the more it contains of those things from which politeness is derived. As if the words are metaphorical, and metaphors of such a kind, and if there is antithesis, adequation, and energy. Images likewise, as we have before observed, are always after a manner approved metaphors, for they are always derived from two things, in the same manner as an analogous metaphor. Thus we say that a shield is the cup of Mars, and that a bow is a stringless harp. When we thus speak, however, the assertion is not simple. But to say that a bow is a harp, or a shield a cup, is a simple assertion. They assimilate, however, as follows, as a player on the flute to an ape, and a short^sighted man to a trickling lamp. For in both there is a contraction, but images are celebrated when they contain a metaphor. For it is to assimilate, to say that a shield is the cup of Mars, that a ruinous building is a worn out garment, and that Niceratus, according to the assimilation of Thrasymachus, was Philoctetes bit by the poet Prates. For Thrasymachus said this in consequence of seeing Niceratus vanquished by Prates in a poetical contest, and through this neglecting his person. In these similitudes, however, poets fail unless they are proper, even if they are celebrated. I mean, for instance, when they say, He carries legs like parsley bent, and As Philemon with Coricus yoked in contest, And all such things are images. But that images are metaphors has been frequently observed by us. Proverbs likewise are metaphors from species to species, i.e. in which one species is predicated of another on account of agreement in the same genus. Thus of him who expects to derive advantage from a certain thing, if he should afterwards suffer a loss from it, it is said as the Carpathian the hare. For both suffered the evil we have mentioned. And thus we have nearly assigned the cause whence and why diction is polite. Celebrated hyperboles also are metaphors, as of one who had contusions on his face, You would have thought him to be a basket of mulberries, for the part under the eyes is red. But this hyperbole is much too great. An hyperbole, however, may differ from an hyperbole in the diction, as instead of saying, Philemon yoked in contest with Corycus, it might be said, You would have thought it was Philemon fighting with Corycus, and instead of saying, He carried legs as distorted as parsley, it might be said, I should have thought that he had not legs, but parsley, they are so distorted. Hyperboles, however, are puerile, for they indicate a vehement motion of the soul. Hence they are especially used by those who are angry. Thus Achilles in Iliad 9 speaks hyperbolically, when he says he is not to be appeased by the gifts of Agamemnon. Though bribes were heaped on bribes in number more than dust in fields, or sands along the shore. And Atride's daughter never shall be led, an ill-matched consort to Achilles' bed, like golden Venus though she charmed the heart, or vied with Pallas in the works of art. The Attic rhetoricians also especially use hyperboles, on which account it is unbecoming in an old man to speak hyperbolically. CHAPTER 12. It is, however, requisite not to be ignorant that a different diction is adapted to each genus of orations. For graphic and agonistic diction, i.e. the diction employed in writing and at the bar, are not the same, nor forensic, and that which is employed in popular harangues. But it is necessary to know both these kinds of diction ; for to know the one is to know how to speak properly, and by a knowledge of the other we are not compelled to be silent when we wish to impart something to others, which those suffer who do not know how to write. But graphic diction, or the diction pertaining to writing, is indeed most accurate, but the agonistic, or that which belongs to the bar, is most adapted to action. Of this latter, however, there are two species, one ethical, but the other pathetic. Hence, also, players choose dramas of this kind, and poets choose such like players to act their fables. Those poets, likewise, are most approved whose fables delight not only when acted, but also when read, such as those of Chaeremon, whose diction is as accurate as that of any writer of orations. And among the dithyrambic poets, those of Lysimachus. When orations also are compared with each other, those which are written will appear when recited in forensic contests to be jejune. On the other hand, those orations which when publicly delivered are heard with applause, if they are perused when written, will appear to be unpolished and inaccurate. The reason of which is, that they are merely adapted to forensic contests. Hence, those which are adapted to action, when deprived of action, in consequence of not accomplishing their proper work, appear to be jejune. Thus, for instance, disjointed sentences and frequent repetition are rightly rejected in the diction pertaining to writing. But rhetoricians use these in the diction which belongs to the bar, for both these are adapted to action. This repetition, however, ought to be delivered with a change of the voice, which as it were prepares the way for action, as, He it is who robbed you, he it is who deceived you, he it is who at last endeavoured to betray you, as Philemon the player also did whilst he acted in the Gerontomeria of Anaxandrides, when Rhadamanthus and Palamede speak, and also in the prologue of the play called the Pious, where I is frequently repeated. For if such repetitions are not accompanied with action, the actor, according to the proverb, will seem to carry a beam. The like also must be observed with respect to disjointed sentences, such as I came, I met him, I requested him. For it is necessary that these should be accompanied with action, and not, as if only one thing was said, pronounced with the same manner, and the same tone of voice. Farther still, disjointed diction possesses something peculiar, since in an equal time many things appear to be said. For the conjunction or connective copula causes many things to be one, so that if it is taken away, it is evident that on the contrary one thing will be many. Hence he amplifies who says, I came, I spoke to him, I supplicated him much, but he seems to despise whatever I have said, whatever I do say. Homer also intends to do this, when speaking of Nereus in the second book of the Iliad, he says, Three ships with Nereus sought the Trojan shore, Nereus, whom Aglae to Charopus bore, Nereus in faultless shape and blooming grace, the loveliest youth of all the Grecian race. For he, of whom many things are said, must necessarily be frequently mentioned. If, therefore, he is frequently mentioned, many things also appear to be said of him. Hence Homer, though he has only mentioned Nereus in one place, amplifies from paralogism, and mentions him here, though he did not intend to mention him in any other place afterwards. The diction therefore adapted to popular harangues perfectly resembles sciagraphy. For the greater the number of the spectators, the more remotely is such a picture to be seen. Hence in both accuracy is superfluous, and both become worse through it. But judicial diction is more accurate, and it is requisite that the diction should be still more accurate, which is addressed to one judge. For this is the least thing in rhetorical diction. For that which is appropriate to, and that which is foreign from a thing, are more easily perceived. In this case also, contention is absent, so that the judgment is pure. Hence the same rhetoricians are not celebrated in all these kinds of diction. But where action is especially necessary, their accuracy is in the smallest degree requisite. And where voice, and especially a loud one is required, there action is necessary. Demonstrative diction, therefore, is most proper for writing. For demonstrative orations are composed in order that they may be read. But judicial diction is the next in order. It is however superfluous to divide diction into the pleasing and magnificent. For why may it not as well be divided into the temperate and liberal, or into any other ethical virtue? For it is evident that the particulars already mentioned will render it pleasing, if the virtue of diction has been rightly defined by us. For why ought it to be perspicuous, and not abject, but decorous? Since it will not be perspicuous, either if it be verbose or concise. But it is evident that the medium between these is appropriate. The particulars also, before mentioned, render diction pleasing, if usual and foreign words are well mingled together, and likewise rhythm, and that which is calculated to persuade from the decorous. And thus much concerning diction, as well in common about every, as in particular about each genus. CHAPTER 13. It now remains that we should speak concerning the order of diction. But there are two parts of an oration. For it is necessary to speak of the thing which is the subject of discussion, and then to demonstrate. Hence it is impossible for him who narrates a thing not to demonstrate, or that he should demonstrate without previous narration. For he who demonstrates, demonstrates something, and he who propounds, propounds for the sake of demonstrating. Of these necessary parts of an oration, however, the one is the proposition, but the other the confirmation. In the same manner as in the sciences, one thing is a problem, but another a demonstration. But the division which rhetoricians now make is ridiculous. For narration belongs to a forensic oration. But in the demonstrative and deliberative genus, how can there be an oration, such as they say there is, or those things which are urged against the opponent? Or how can there be a peroration of things demonstrative? The proem, however, the comparison, and the repetition, then take place in orations to the people when there is altercation (for in these there is frequently accusation and defence), but not so far as there is consultation in these. But neither does peroration belong to every forensic oration. For it is not requisite, when the oration is short, or the thing can easily be remembered, since in this peroration it would happen that something would be taken away from the length of such an oration. The necessary parts of an oration, therefore, are proposition and proof. And these indeed are proper or peculiar parts. But the most numerous parts of an oration are the proem, the proposition, proof, and peroration. For what is said against the opponent pertains to proof, and the comparison is an amplification of our arguments, so that it is a certain part of the proof, for he demonstrates something who does this. Neither the proem, however, nor the peroration is a part of the proof, but each is subservient to recollection. If, therefore, any one makes a division of things of this kind, like the followers of Theodorus, narration, pre-narration, supernarration, confutation, and superconfutation will be different from each other. It is necessary, however, that he who speaks of a certain species and difference of a thing should give a name to it. For if not, it will become vain and nugatory. And this fault of needlessly introducing new names was committed by Licymnius in his Art of Rhetoric, when he speaks of eruption, aberration, and ramification. CHAPTER 14. The proem, therefore, is the beginning of an oration, which in dramatic poetry is the prologue, and in playing on the pipe the prelude. For all these are principles or beginnings, and as it were preparatory to what follows. And the prelude, indeed, is similar to the proem of the demonstrative kind of orations. For as those that play on the pipe connect the prelude with the beginning of the song, thus also in demonstrative orations, immediately after the orator has mentioned what he wishes to say, it is necessary to collect aptly with it what is to follow. Of which all rhetoricians adduce as an example the proem of Isocrates in his oration in praise of Helen. For Isocrates begins his encomium with blaming the sophists, which has nothing in common with the praise of Helen. And yet, because he has aptly conjoined it with the argument, he has obtained praise. But the proems of demonstrative orations are derived from praise or blame, as in the proem of Gorgias to his Olympic oration, O Greeks, this is a thing worthy of general admiration. For he praises those who instituted the public spectacles. Isocrates, on the contrary, blames them, because they honoured indeed with gifts the virtues of the body, but appointed no reward for wise men. The proems also of demonstrative orations are derived from counsel and advice, such for instance as, that it is requisite to honour good men, on which account he, the orator, has undertaken to praise Aristides. Or as he who wrote an oration in praise of Paris, for he says, that it is neither requisite to praise those who are celebrated, nor those who are of no account, but those who are good, and at the same time obscure men, such as was Paris, the son of Priam." For he who thus begins his oration is one that gives counsel. Farther still, the proems of demonstrative orations are derived from forensic proems. But this is from things pertaining to the hearer, if the oration is concerning something paradoxical, or difficult, or much celebrated, so as to require pardon from the auditors. Such for instance as the proem of Corylus, "But now, since all things are divulged." The proems, therefore, of demonstrative orations are derived from these things, viz. From praise and blame, from exhortation and dissuasion, and from those things which are referred to the hearer. It is necessary, however, that the proems should either be foreign or appropriate to the oration. With respect to proems of the forensic kind, it is necessary to assume that they are able to effect the same thing as the prologues of dramatic, and the proems of epic poems. For dithyrambic proems are similar to those of the demonstrative kind, as "On account of thee, and thy gifts or spoils." But in dramatic and epic poems, the proems are a specimen of what is to follow, that the reader may foresee what the subject of them is, and that his mind may not be kept in suspense. For that which is indefinite causes the mind to wander. The poet, therefore, who delivers into the hands of the reader the beginning of his poem, makes him follow with attention the rest of it. Hence Homer, "The wrath of Peleus' son, O goddess, sing," and "The man for wisdom's various arts renowned, long exercised in woes, O muse, resound." And another poet, "Again, O muse, inspire my verse, and sing how from the Asian land a mighty war spread over Europe." Tragic poets also indicate respecting the drama, though not immediately, as Euripides does, yet they indicate what it is in the prologue, as Sophocles in the CEdipus, "Polybius was my father." And after the same manner comic poets. The most necessary and proper office, therefore, of a proem is this, to unfold the end for the sake of which the oration was composed. On which account, if the end is manifest, and the subject matter is trifling, the proem must be omitted. Other species of proems, however, which are used by orators, are remedies and things of a common nature. And these are derived from the speaker and the hearer, from the subject matter, and from the opponent. From the orator, therefore, and the opponent, those proems are derived which pertain to the dissolving or making an accusation. But these must not be similarly employed by the plaintiff and defendant. For by the defendant, what pertains to accusation must be introduced in the beginning, but by the plaintiff at the end of the oration. But for what reason it is not immanifest. For it is necessary that the defendant, when he is about to introduce himself, should remove all impediments, so that he must dissolve the accusation at the beginning of his speech. But the opponent should be criminated by the plaintiff at the end, in order that the hearers may remember the better. What, however, pertains to the auditor consists in rendering him benevolent to the orator, and enraged with the opponent. Sometimes, also, it is advantageous to the cause that the auditor should be attentive, and sometimes that he should not. For it is not always beneficial to render him attentive. Hence, many orators endeavour to excite laughter in their hearers. A summary account of a thing also contributes to celerity of apprehension. And this is likewise effected by the orator's appearing to be a worthy man. For the audience are more attentive to men of this description. But they are attentive to great things, to things pertaining to themselves, to admirable and to delightful things. Hence it is necessary to inform the audience that the oration will be concerning things of this kind. On the contrary, if the orator wishes the audience not to be attentive to the cause, he must say that the subject matter is a thing of small consequence, that it does not pertain to them, and that it is a troublesome affair. It is necessary, however, not to be ignorant that all such things are foreign to the orations, for they pertain to a depraved hearer, and to one who attends to what is foreign to the purpose. For if he were not a person of this description, there would be no occasion for a proem, except so far as it is requisite to give a summary account of the affair, in order that the oration, as a body, may have a head. Farther still, to render the audience attentive, if it should be requisite, is common to all the parts of an oration, because universally the audience are less attentive to what is said in the progress than in the beginning of the oration. Hence it is ridiculous to endeavour to procure attention in the beginning of the oration, because then all the hearers are especially attentive. Hence attention is to be procured wherever occasion offers, by saying for instance, Give me your attention, for this business is not more mine than yours, and I will relate to you a transaction of such a nature, that you have never heard of any thing so dreadful or so admirable. But this is, as Prodicus says, when the audience are drowsy, to promise to say something to them from his demonstration, estimated at 50 drachmas. It is evident, however, that the proem is referred to the auditor, not so far as he is an auditor, for all orators in the proems either criminate or dissolve fear, as from the Antigone of Sophocles, I will tell you, O king, though it was not my intention to have come hither as a messenger, and from the Iphigenia in Taurus of Euripides, Why do you preface? A proem also is necessary when the cause is bad, or appears to be bad, for in this case it is better to discuss any thing else than to dwell upon the cause. Hence servants do not directly reply to the question they are asked, but their answer is circuitous and prefatory. But we have shown whence it is requisite to render the audience benevolent, and have explained every thing else of this kind. Since, however, it is well said by Ulysses to Minerva in Odyssey 14, Give me as a friend, and a man to be pitied, to reach Phoenicia's land, it is necessary to pay attention to these two things. But in proems of the demonstrative kind, it is necessary to make the auditor fancy, that either himself, or his race, or his pursuits, or something else belonging to him, is praised, together with the person who is the subject of the oration. For what Socrates says in the Menexemus of Plato is true, that it is not difficult to praise the Athenians among the Athenians, but among the Lacedaemonians. But the proems of popular orations are derived from those of the forensic kind. For these have not naturally any themselves, since the audience are well acquainted with the subject, and the thing itself is not in want of any proem. But a proem is here requisite either on account of the orator, or the opponents, or if the audience should not think the affair of just so much consequence as it is, but of greater or less consequence. Hence it is necessary either to criminate the opponent, or to dissolve the accusation against him, and either to amplify or diminish the affair. But for the sake of these things a proem is requisite, or a proem is necessary for the sake of ornament, since without this the oration will appear to be carelessly composed. And such is the encomium of Gorgias on the Eleans, for without any previous extension and graceful movement of his arms, like the Athletæ before they engage, he immediately begins, Elis, a happy city. End of chapter 14 of book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 15 of book 3 of Rhetoric. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Rhetoric by Aristotle. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 15 of book 3. With respect, however, to the dissolution of crimes objected by the opponent, one mode is derived from those things through which the ill opinion of the audience may be removed. For it makes no difference whether this opinion arises from what is said or not, so that this mode is universal. Another mode consists in obviating such particulars as are dubious, either by showing that the thing which is the subject of doubt does not exist, or that it is not noxious, or that it is not noxious to this person, or that it is not so pernicious as the opponent contends it to be, or that it is not unjust, or that it is not greatly so, or that it is not disgraceful, or that it is a thing of small consequence. For things of this kind are the subjects of contention. And this mode was adopted by Iphicrates against Nausicrates, for he confessed that he did what he was accused by Nausicrates of having done, and that he did harm to the person, but did not act unjustly. Or he that has injured another may say that he has made him a compensation, so that if what he did was noxious, yet it was beautifully done, if painful, yet it was beneficial. Or something else of the like kind may be said. Another mode consists in showing that the deed which is objected to as a crime was an error, or happened from misfortune, or from necessity. Thus Sophocles said, that he trembled not, as his accuser said, that he might seem to be an old man, but from necessity, for he was not willingly 80 years of age. An excuse also may be made by asserting that the deed was not done with a view to that end it is said to have been done by the opponent. Thus he who is accused of having injured another person may say, that it was not his intention to injure him, but that the injury was accidental, and that it would be just to hate him if the injury had been done by him voluntarily. Another mode consists in considering whether the opponent himself, or some of his kindred, have now, or formerly, been involved in the crime which he objects to the defendant. Another mode consists in showing that those also are involved in the crime whom the opponent confesses not to be obnoxious to the accusation. As if the opponent should confess that this man, though he is an adulterer, is pure in his conduct, then this and this man also will be pure. Another mode consists in showing that if the opponent has accused others falsely before, it is probable that he now falsely accuses the defendant. Or if it is shown that those who are now accused have been at another time falsely accused, for then it is probable that now also they are falsely accused. In order likewise to remove a bad opinion, it may be said, that the same persons, who at another time have been suspected of a crime, though no one has accused them, have been found to be innocent. Another mode consists in reciprocally criminating the accuser. For if the accuser is unworthy of belief, it is absurd that his assertions should be credible. Another mode consists in showing that the present cause has been decided before, as Euripides does in the action against Hygiaontes, which is called Antidosis, who accused him as an impious person. For when he objected to Euripides, that in that verse of his, the tongue has sworn, but unsworn is the mind, he persuaded men to perjure themselves. Euripides replied, that his accuser acted unjustly in bringing decisions into a court of justice which had formerly been made in the contest pertaining to Bacchus ; for in that tribunal he had defended the verse, and would again defend it, if he was willing to accuse him in that place." Another mode consists in reprobating false accusations, and in showing how great an evil calumny is, and that it is also attended with the evil of producing other judicial processes. The place, however, which is derived from symbols is common to both, i.e. to him who accuses, and to the crimination. Thus Ulysses in the tragedy called Teucer, accuses Teucer as the friend of the Trojans, because he was allied to Priam." For Hesione, the mother of Teucer, was the sister of Priam. But Teucer replied, That his father Telamon was an enemy to Priam, and that he (Teucer) did not discover to the Trojans the spies which the Greeks sent to Troy." Another place pertains to the accuser, and consists in praising in a small degree, in order to blame afterwards more copiously ; and if the opponent has performed any great deed, to mention it concisely, or having enumerated many of his good deeds, which do not pertain to the cause, to blame one of his actions, which does not pertain to it. But accusers of this kind are most artificial and unjust ; for they endeavour to injure by good deeds, mingling them with one evil deed. It is common, however, to the accuser, and to him who dissolves the crime, since it is possible that the same thing may have been done for the sake of many things. It is common to the accuser, indeed, to represent the affair in the worst, but to him who dissolves the crime to represent it in the best point of view. Thus it may be said, that Diomed preferred Ulysses as his associate in the night adventure in Iliad 10, because he thought Ulysses to be the best of the Greeks. Or it may be said, that he did not prefer him for this reason, but because he alone was not his antagonist, as being a man of no consequence. And thus much concerning accusation. CHAPTER XVI. But narration in demonstrative orations is not continued, but distinguished into parts. For it is necessary in demonstrative orations to enumerate those actions from which the oration is composed. For an oration of this kind is composed so as to be partly inartificial (since the orator is not the cause of any of the actions), and partly artificial. This, however, consists in showing either that the thing is, if it is incredible, or what the quality or quantity of it is, or in exhibiting all these. On this account, sometimes it is not requisite to narrate every thing, because thus to demonstrate is adverse to facility of remembrance. Thus, for instance, it may be said, that from these things it appears that he is a brave man, but from those a wise or a just man. And the one oration is more simple, i.e. the oration in which every thing is narrated in a continued series without any confirmation and amplification ; but the other, in which there is confirmation and amplification, is various and not elaborate. It is necessary, however, to call to mind things and persons known and celebrated ; on which account the greater part of celebrated persons and things do not require narration ; as if, for instance, you should be willing to praise Achilles, for all men are acquainted with his actions. But it is requisite to make use of these actions. But if you were willing to praise Critias, narration is necessary, for he is not known by many persons. At present, however, rhetoricians ridiculously say that narration should be rapid ; though what a certain person said in reply to a baker who asked, whether he wished that he should make soft or hard bread, may be applied to these. For his answer was, Is it not possible to make good bread so that it may be neither hard nor soft, but of a moderate condition ? For it is requisite neither to make a long narration, as neither is it necessary to make a long exordium, nor to dwell on the credibility of what is narrated ; since here also propriety consists neither in rapidity nor conciseness, but in mediocrity. But this is effected by narrating such things as render the affair manifest, or such things as induce the audience to believe that the thing has been done, or that the person has been hurt, or the injury has been committed, or that the transactions were of the magnitude which the orator wishes the hearer to believe they were. Things, however, of a nature contrary to these are to be adduced by the opponent. The orator likewise should insert in his narration such things as pertain to his own virtue, such as, *' But I always admonish him to act justly, and not to desert his children." Or he should insert in his narration such things as pertain to the depravity of another person, as in the above instance, " But he answered me, that wherever he was he should have other children," which Herodotus in Euterpe says was the answer of the Egyptians when they revolted from their king. Or he should insert such things as are pleasing to the judges. To the defendant, however, narration is less necessary. But the subjects of controversies are, whether a thing has been done or not, whether it is detrimental or not, whether it is unjust or not, and whether it is a thing of so much consequence or not. Hence the defendant must not dwell upon a thing that is acknowledged, unless something is said in opposition to his statement of the affair. For then he must show, that admitting the thing to have been done, yet it was not unjust. Farther still, it is necessary to narrate things which have not been done, as if they had been done, if they are calculated to produce commiseration or indignation. Examples of this are the fabulous narration of Ulysses to Alcinous, and again to Penelope, which is effected in 30 verses. Another example is that of Phaedrus, who contracted a very long poem which is called the Circle, and also the prologue of Euripides in his Aeneas. But it is necessary that the narration should be ethical, and this will be effected if we know what produces manners. One thing, therefore, which produces them, is a manifestation of deliberate choice, and manners are good or bad from the quality which they possess. But deliberate choice is such as it is from the end. On this account mathematical discussions are not ethical, because they do not contain in themselves deliberate choice. For they have not that for the sake of which a thing is done, i.e. they do not consider the end. But this is the business of Socratic discussions ; for these consider things of this kind. The oration also expresses manners which exhibits such things as are consequent to manners, such as, That at the same time he said these things, he went away." For this manifests audacity and rusticity of manners. The oration likewise is rendered ethical by not speaking as if from a syllogistic process, like rhetoricians of the present day, but as if from deliberate intention, as, I have wished," and, For this was the object of my deliberate choice, since though I should desire no emolument from it, it is a better thing." For the one, i.e. to speak as if from a syllogistic process, is the province of a prudent man ; but the other, i.e. to speak from deliberate intention, is the province of a good man. For it belongs to a prudent man to pursue what is beneficial, but to a good man to pursue what is beautiful in conduct. If, however, what you narrate is incredible, then the cause is to be explained. An example of which is from the Antigone of Sophocles, That she was more anxiously concerned for her brother than for her husband or children ; for she might repair the loss of her husband and children by marrying again, but her mother and father having descended to Hades, she could never have another brother." But if you cannot assign the cause, you may say, That you are not ignorant you relate what is incredible, but that you are naturally disposed not to admit any thing disgraceful." For mankind do not believe that any action is performed willingly except it is advantageous. Again, that the narration may be ethical, it is requisite that it should be pathetic. And this is effected by relating such things as are consequent to the passions which are known to the audience, and which particularly relate either to the orator or his opponent, as, But he departed, looking after me, and as Aeschines says of Cratylus, That he hissed and clapped with his hands. For these things are adapted to persuade, because these things which the audience know are symbols of what they do not know. Many things also of this kind may be assumed from Homer, as in Odyssey 19, Then o'er her face the beldam spread her hands. For those who begin to weep cover their eyes with their hands. In the beginning of the oration, likewise, you should introduce yourself as a worthy, and your opponent as an unworthy man, that the audience may survey you and your opponent as such. But this should be done latently. And that this may be easily accomplished may be seen from those who announce any thing to us. For concerning things of which we know nothing, we at the same time form a certain opinion of their truth or falsehood. In many places, however, it is necessary to narrate, and sometimes not in the beginning of the oration. But in a popular oration there is no need of narration, because no one makes a narration of future events. If, however, there should happen to be a narration in it, it will be of past events, in order that by recalling them into the memory there may be a better consultation about such as are future, either employing on this occasion accusation or praise. But then he who does this will not perform the office of a counsellor. If, however, that which is narrated is incredible, then you ought to promise the audience that you will immediately assign the cause of it, and leave it to the audience to believe or not, as they please. Thus Iocasta in the Oedipus of Carcinus, when she says something incredible in answer to him who asks her concerning his son, always promises that she would prove the truth of what she had said. And the Aemon of Sophocles employs the same art. Chapter 17. It is necessary, however, that credibility should be demonstrative. But it is requisite to demonstrate (since controversy is respecting four things) by adducing a demonstration of the controverted subject. Thus, for instance, if it is controverted whether a thing has been done, it is especially necessary in a judicial process to give a demonstration of this. Or if it is controverted whether this man has been injured, or whether he has been injured to the extent alleged, or whether justly or not, and in a similar manner of the existence of the thing controverted. Nor must we be ignorant that in this controversy alone, one of the persons must necessarily be depraved. For here ignorance is not the cause, as if certain persons were disputing about justice, so that this controversy, but not others, must be diligently discussed. But in demonstrative orations, the amplification will for the most part consist in showing that actions have been beautiful and beneficial. For it is necessary to believe in facts. For demonstrations are seldom given of these things unless they are incredible, or another person is supposed to be the cause of them. In popular orations, however, it may be contended that a thing will not be, or that what is advised will take place, but that it is not just, or it is not beneficial, or that it is not of such great consequence. It is likewise necessary to see whether the opponent has asserted any thing false, which does not pertain to the cause, since from this, as from a sign, it may be inferred that he has also spoken falsely in other things. Examples, however, are indeed most adapted to popular orations, but enthymemes to judicial orations. For the former are conversant with the future, so that examples must necessarily be derived from past events. But judicial orations are conversant with things which exist, or do not exist, in which there is in a greater degree demonstration and necessity. for that which has been done is attended with necessity. Enthymemes, however, must not be adduced in a continued series, but must be mingled with other things more pleasant and easy, since if this is not done, they will be detrimental to each other, for there is a boundary of quantity. Hence in Homer, in Odyssey 4, Menelaus praises Pisistratus, the son of Nestor, for the mediocrity of his speech. Dear youth, you have said just as much as a wise man would have said. For he does not praise him that he said such things, but so much, and no more. Nor must enthymemes be investigated in every subject. For if this precept is not observed, you will do that which some of those who philosophize do, who syllogistically collect things more known and credible than the propositions from which they are deduced. When, likewise, you wish to excite the passions, do not introduce an enthymeme, i.e. abstain from argument. For the enthymeme will either expel the passion, or will be introduced in vain. For motions which exist at one and the same time expel each other, and either destroy themselves, or become imbecile. Nor when the oration is ethical is it proper at the same time to search for any enthymeme. For demonstration has neither the power of expressing manners, nor deliberate choice. Sentences, however, must be used both in narration and confirmation, for they are ethical, as, And I indeed entrusted him with this, though I knew that it was not proper to believe in any man. But if you wish to speak pathetically, you may say, And I do not repent, though I have been injured. For gain is with him, but justice with me. It is not without reason, however, that popular orations are more difficult than such as are judicial, because they are conversant with the future, but the judicial are conversant with the past, which is scientifically known to diviners, as Epimenides the Cretan said. For he did not predict about future events, but about such past events as were immanifest. And the law is an hypothesis in judicial orations, but he who possesses the principle can more easily discover the demonstration. Popular orations likewise have not many digressions, such for instance as a digression to the opponent, either respecting himself, or which may produce the pathetic. But such orations admit these, the least of all things, unless they depart from their proper employment. It is requisite, therefore, that he should digress, who is in want of arguments. And this method is adopted by the Athenian rhetoricians, and also by Isocrates. For giving counsel, he accuses the Lacedaemonians in his panegyric, but in his oration concerning peace, he accuses Chares. In demonstrative orations, however, it is requisite to insert praise as an episode, as Isocrates does, for he always introduces something which he may praise. And Gorgias employed the same art, who said, That he should never be in want of an oration. For if he speaks of Achilles, he praises Peleus, afterwards Aeacus, and afterwards the god, i.e. Jupiter, the great grandfather of Achilles. In a similar manner he praises the fortitude of Achilles. He, therefore, who has demonstrations, may speak both ethically and demonstratively. But if you have not enthymemes, you may speak ethically. And it is more adapted to a worthy man that he should appear to be a good man, than that he should deliver an accurate oration. Of enthymemes, however, those which are adapted to confutation are more approved than those which are demonstrative, because such things as produce confutation are evidently more syllogistic, for contraries, when placed by each other, become more known. Arguments, however, which are employed against the opponent are not specifically different from those which we employ in our own defence. But it pertains to credibility to dissolve some things by objection, and others by syllogism. It is also necessary, both in consultation and in a judicial process, that he who first pleads his cause should in the first place confirm his cause, but afterwards should dissolve or extenuate the arguments contrary to his own. But if the opposing arguments are many, these must be first confuted, as Callistratus did in the Messeniac assembly. For he first refuted what his adversaries could say, and then said what conduced to his own cause. He however who speaks in the second place, ought first to encounter the reasoning of his adversary, dissolving it, and syllogizing in opposition to it, and especially if the arguments of his opponents have been approved. For as the soul is not favourably disposed towards those who have been already accused of crimes, after the same manner neither does it willingly attend to an oration, if the opponent appears to have spoken well. In order to prepare the mind of the auditor therefore to hear an oration, it is necessary first to show that what the opponent has said is false. Hence the orator must fight against either all the arguments of his opponent, or the greatest of them, or those which are most approved, or those which may be easily confuted, and thus render his own arguments credible. Thus Hecuba in Euripides, But first the goddesses I will assist, for Juno, &c. For here Hecuba first confutes what was most infirm, and thus much concerning confirmation. But with respect to manners, since for a man to say certain things about himself is either invidious, or is attended with circumlocution, or contradiction, and to speak of another is attended either with slander or rusticity, hence it is necessary to introduce another person speaking, as Isocrates does in his oration against Philip, and in his Antidosis, and as Archilochus blames. For he makes the father Lycambes say concerning his daughter in an iambic verse, There is nothing which may not be expected to be done, and nothing which will not be sworn to through money. And in another iambic, the beginning of which is, I care not for the riches of Gyges, he introduces Charon, the artist speaking. Thus also Aemon, the son of Creon, and the husband of Antigone in Sophocles, while he supplicates his father Creon for the life of Antigone, commemorates the praises of Antigone not from his own proper, but from another person. It is necessary also to change enthymemes, and sometimes to change them into sentences, as, It is requisite that those who are intelligent should form compacts with enemies when they are in prosperity, for thus they will be attended with the greatest advantage. But this is done enthymematically, as follows, For if it is then requisite to form compacts when they are most useful, and replete with the most advantageous conditions, it is also necessary that they should be made in prosperity. CHAPTER 18. With respect to interrogation, it is then especially seasonable to employ it when something is said by the opponent of such a nature, that by the addition of one interrogation an absurdity will ensue. Thus Pericles asked Lampo concerning the mysteries of Ceres, who was called the saviour goddess, but Lampo replied, that it was unlawful for one who was uninitiated to hear them related. Pericles however again asked him, if he knew these mysteries, and Lampo replying that he did, And how is this possible, said Pericles, since you are uninitiated? In the second place, it is seasonable to employ interrogation when one of the premises from which something follows favourable to our cause is perspicuous, but the other will be evidently granted by the opponent. For then it is requisite to interrogate concerning such premise, and immediately conclude, without interrogating concerning the other premise, which is perspicuous. Thus Socrates, when Meletus accused him of not believing there were gods, asked him whether he thought there was any such thing as a daemoniacal nature. And when Meletus acknowledged that he did, Socrates also asked him whether demons were not either the sons of the gods, or something divine. But Meletus granting that they were, is it possible therefore, said Socrates, that any one can believe that there are sons of the gods, and yet that there are no gods? Farther still, interrogation may likewise be seasonably employed when we wish to show that the opponent contradicts himself, or asserts something paradoxical. In the fourth place, it may be opportunely employed when the opponent can only answer to what is said sophistically, by asserting that a certain thing is, and is not, or partly is, and partly is not, or in a certain respect is, and in a certain respect is not. For the auditors are disturbed by such answers, and are dubious as to their meaning. When however none of the above mentioned opportunities occur, interrogation must not be employed. For if it should happen that the opponent answers properly, and eludes the interrogation, he who interrogates will appear to be vanquished. For many questions must not be asked on account of the imbecility of the mind of the auditor. Hence it is especially necessary that enthymemes should be contracted. It is likewise requisite to reply to ambiguous questions by logically dividing, and not speaking concisely. But to things apparently true, a solution must immediately be given with the answer, before the opponent can add a second interrogation, or syllogize. For it is not difficult to foresee what he wishes to infer. This however and the solutions, i.e. the mode of avoiding and solving captious interrogations, will be manifest to us from the topics. If the question also of the opponent produces a conclusion against us, it will be opportune in the answer to assign the cause why it does so. Thus Sophocles being asked by Pisander whether he was of the opinion of the other senators that a dominion of 40 persons should be established, he replied that he was. And when he was asked again, Does not this appear to you to be a base thing? He said, it does. Have you therefore, Pisander replied, given your assent to this base deed? I have, said Sophocles, for no better measure could be adopted. Thus too, that Lacon, who had been an Ephorus or senator, when he was desired to give an account of his conduct while he was in administration, was asked by some one, whether his colleagues appeared to him to have been justly condemned. He replied, they did. But the other then said, Did not you also decree the same things together with them? He acknowledged that he did. Is it not therefore just, the other replied, that you should be put to death? By no means, said Lacon, for they did these things having received money for doing them, but I did not, since my conduct was the result of my own judgment. Hence, neither is it proper to interrogate after the conclusion, nor to interrogate concerning the conclusion itself, unless much truth is contained in it. With respect to ridicule, however, since it appears to possess a certain use in contests, and it is necessary, as Gorgias rightly said, that the serious arguments of the opponent should be dissolved by laughter, and his laughter by serious arguments, we have shown in the Poetic how many species of ridicule there are. But of these species, one indeed is adapted to a liberal man, and another is not. The orator therefore must assume that species of ridicule which is adapted to the occasion. Irony, however, is more liberal than scurrility. For he who employs irony produces the ridiculous for his own sake, but he who employs scurrility for the sake of another person. CHAPTER 19. Epilogue, however, or peroration, is composed from 4 things. From that which may cause the auditor to think well of the orator and ill of his opponent, from amplification and extenuation, from that which may excite the passions of the auditor, and from recalling to the memory what has been said. For it is natural after demonstration for the orator to show that what he has asserted is true, and that what his opponent has said is false, and thus to praise and blame and conciliate the good opinion of the audience. But of 2 things it is requisite that the orator should direct his attention to one of them, viz. Either to show that he is good to the audience, or that he is simply a worthy man, and that his opponent is bad to the audience, or that he is simply a bad man. We have shown, however, what the places are from which things of this kind are to be derived, viz. Whence it may be inferred that men are worthy or depraved. In the next place, it is requisite to amplify or extenuate according to nature what has now been demonstrated. For it is necessary that it should be acknowledged a thing has been done, if the orator intends to speak of its magnitude. For the increase of bodies is from pre^existent substances. But we have already shown whence the places of amplification and extenuation are to be derived. After these things, however, since it is evident what their quality and quantity are, the orator should excite the passions of the auditor. But these are pity and indignation, anger and hatred, envy, emulation, and contention. And we have before shown the places of these. Hence it remains that in the peroration the orator should recall into the memory of the audience what has been before said. But this is to be done in such a way as others improperly teach us to do in proems. For that a thing may be easily understood, they order us to repeat it frequently. In proems, indeed, it is necessary to speak of the thing which is the subject of discussion, lest the audience should be ignorant what that is which is to be decided. But here in peroration, the arguments which have been employed must be summarily repeated. The beginning, however, of the peroration should be, that the orator has accomplished what he promised, so that he must then explain what those things are of which he has spoken, and on what account they were discussed by him. But the repetition should be made from a comparison of what has been said by the opponent. And it is requisite to compare either such things as have been said on the same subject, both by the orator and his opponent, or such things as have not been said by both of them on the same subject, as, And he indeed said this on the subject, but I that, and for these reasons, Or the repetition should be made from irony, as, For he said this, but I that, and, What would he have done if he had shown that those things were transacted, and not these? Or from interrogation, as, What has not been shown? Or thus, What has the opponent shown? Either, therefore, the repetition must be thus made, or it must be made from comparison, or the orator must repeat in a natural order what he has said. And again, if he is so inclined, he may repeat what his opponent has said. That mode of diction, however, is adapted to the conclusion of the oration, which is called disjunctive, in order that it may be an epilogue, and not an oration ; such as, I have said, you have heard, you are masters of the subject, judge for yourselves. End of Book 3, and end of Rhetoric, by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. Recording in memory of Mitchell, Edwards.